The great hall of Valethorn was cold, even though 100 torches burned along its stone walls. Lyra Voss stood in the center of that hall, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, while the court watched her the way people watch something broken. "Look at her," Lady Seraphine said, her voice carrying easily across the silent room. "The king's mate. An Omega who cannot even shift. What kind of queen trembles like a child?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Lyra kept her eyes on the floor. She had learned, over the past year, that looking up only invited more cruelty. Her pale eyes were considered strange among the wolves of Valethorn, another mark against her, another reason for the nobles to whisper behind their hands. At the far end of the hall, seated upon a throne carved from black stone, King Draven Ashgrave said nothing. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of quiet strength that made grown warriors lower their gaze. He had been forced into this bond a year ago, when the council decided that a political marriage would settle unrest between two feuding packs. He had never wanted it. He had never hidden that he didn't want it. And so, for a year, he had let his silence speak for him. He did not defend Lyra. He did not sit beside her at feasts. He barely looked at her at all. Lyra had told herself, in the beginning, that his coldness didn't matter. She had told herself she was strong enough to endure the whispers, the sideways glances, the way servants sometimes forgot to bring her meals. But strength, she was learning, could wear thin, like fabric pulled too many times in the same direction. "Enough," Draven said finally, his voice flat. It wasn't a defense of her. It was simply an order to end the entertainment, the way one might tell children to stop a game that had gone on too long. Seraphine smiled, satisfied, and stepped back into the crowd. The court began to murmur about other matters, already forgetting the Omega who stood alone in the center of the hall. Lyra did not wait to be dismissed. She turned and walked out, her spine straight, though her chest ached with something she refused to name. She did not go back to her chambers. Instead, her feet carried her toward the edge of the castle grounds, past the guards who barely glanced at her, and into the tree line beyond. She knew, somewhere in the back of her mind, that she was walking toward the sacred grove, a place forbidden to Omegas, forbidden to anyone who was not of royal blood. But she didn't care anymore. If the world had already decided she was worthless, then perhaps a forbidden forest was exactly where she belonged. The trees grew thicker as she walked, their branches twisting overhead like fingers reaching for the moon. The air grew colder, and yet strangely, it did not feel threatening. It felt old, patient, as though the forest itself were waiting for something. Lyra did not know how long she walked before her legs gave out beneath her. She sank to her knees in a small clearing, where a flat stone altar rose from the earth, covered in moss and carved with symbols she did not recognize, spirals, wolf heads, and long unbroken lines that seemed to circle endlessly. "I don't understand what I did wrong," she whispered to no one. Tears slipped down her face before she could stop them. I tried to be what they wanted, and it was never enough." Her hand, trembling, brushed against the rough edge of the stone. A thin cut opened across her palm. She hadn't even felt the sharp edge, and a single drop of blood fell onto the altar. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground beneath her began to hum. It was not loud, it was not violent. It was a low vibration, like the deepest note of a song being played somewhere far beneath the earth. Lyra gasped and scrambled back, pressing herself against a nearby tree as the moss on the altar began to glow faintly gold. Mist rose from the forest floor, curling upward in slow, deliberate spirals. And from that mist, shapes began to form, large, powerful, ancient. Wolves, taller than any she had ever seen, their fur silver, and their eyes burning like twin flames. They did not growl. They did not bare their teeth. One by one, they stepped forward and lowered their massive heads. They were kneeling. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She had heard stories, as a child, about the first pack. The wolves said to have founded Valethorn long before kings and courts existed. Wolves who had vanished into legend generations ago. She had never believed the stories were real. No one did anymore. But here they were, gathered in a circle around her, silent and reverent, their golden eyes fixed only on her. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why me?" A voice answered from behind her, calm and steady. Because you are the blood they were waiting for. Lyra turned to see an old woman stepping into the clearing, her eyes clouded white with blindness, though she moved through the forest as though she could see every root and stone. This was Elder Mag, a seer who lived at the edge of the castle grounds, someone the court largely ignored, dismissing her as a relic of old superstitions. Elder Mag, Lyra breathed. What is happening? What are these wolves? The first pack, Mag said, lowering herself carefully to sit on a fallen log. The spirits of Veilthorn's founders. They have slept beneath this grove for hundreds of years, waiting for the one true heir of their bloodline to return. She turned her clouded eyes toward Lyra, though she could not see her, and yet somehow her gaze felt as though it pierced straight through. That heir is you, child. Lyra shook her head, disbelief washing over her. That's impossible. I'm nothing. I couldn't even shift until last year. Everyone says I'm weak. Everyone says a great many things, Mag interrupted gently. Most of them wrong. Your blood carries the mark of the first pack, hidden for generations, passed quietly down through mothers who never knew what slept inside them. It surfaces only in moments of true necessity, in grief, in desperation, in the breaking point of a soul that refuses to give up, even when it feels it has nothing left. Lyra looked back at the wolves, still kneeling, still watching her with quiet devotion. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out a hand. The nearest wolf, larger than a horse, leaned forward and pressed its great head into her palm, as gently as if she were made of glass. Something inside her chest, something that had been clenched tight for a year, maybe longer, finally loosened. They chose you, Mag said softly, not because you are perfect or powerful in the way this court measures power. They chose you because your heart did not break, even when the world tried very hard to break it. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Lyra allowed herself to cry, not from shame, not from humiliation, but from something that felt almost like relief. It was in that moment that a new sound broke through the clearing, footsteps, fast and heavy, crashing through the underbrush. King Draven emerged from the trees, breathing hard, his eyes wide with something Lyra had never seen on his face before: fear. He had gone to her chambers after the court dispersed, meaning to say something, he wasn't even sure what, and found her missing. A guard mentioned seeing her walk toward the forest, and something in his chest had twisted painfully at the thought of her alone in the dark, especially after the way the court had treated her. He had run the entire way. Now he stood at the edge of the clearing, frozen, staring at the sight before him. Massive spectral wolves, glowing faintly in the moonlight, kneeling in a perfect circle around his mate. Lyra, he said, her name barely a whisper. She turned to him, her cheeks still wet, but her eyes steady in a way he had never seen before. The ancient wolves lifted their heads slightly at his approach, watching him with old, knowing eyes, though they did not move to block him. You came, she said quietly. I should have come sooner, Draven said, stepping closer, though he kept a respectful distance from the wolves. I should have come every time they hurt you. I told myself my silence was neutrality, but it wasn't. It was cowardice. He swallowed hard. I let them treat you like nothing, and now I understand that you were never nothing. You were everything this kingdom was built upon, and I couldn't even see it. Elder Mag rose slowly, using her walking stick for support. The first pack does not kneel for power alone, King Draven. They kneel for worthiness. Your mate has survived a year of cruelty without losing the goodness in her heart. That is a rarer strength than any shift, any bloodline, any crown. Draven's throat tightened. He looked at Lyra, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time since their bonding, and saw not the frail, mocked Omega the court had painted her to be, but a woman who had endured, quietly and without complaint, more than anyone should have to. I'm sorry, he said, the words rough. I failed you. I will spend as long as it takes making that right, if you'll allow me the chance. Lyra studied him for a long moment. The old hurt was still there. She knew it would take time to fully heal, but something in his voice, in the way he had run through the dark forest the moment he feared for her safety, told her his words were not empty. We'll see, she said softly. Not a rejection, but not a full forgiveness either. Simply honesty. And Draven, to his credit, nodded, accepting that her trust was something to be earned, not assumed. Word of what happened in the sacred grove spread through the castle before the sun rose the next morning. By the time Lyra returned to the great hall, this time walking beside Draven rather than standing alone before him, the entire court had gathered, buzzing with confusion and fear. The doors opened, and silver mist curled in behind her, ancient wolves padding silently at her sides, their massive forms filling the hall with a presence no one could ignore. The laughter that had once filled that room the day before was gone. In its place was stunned, frightened silence. Seraphine, who had led the cruelest taunts, stepped back instinctively as one of the wolves turned its glowing eyes toward her. She opened her mouth, perhaps to offer some excuse, some clever remark to save face, but no words came. Lyra walked to the center of the hall, the same spot where she had once stood trembling under the court's laughter, and this time, she did not lower her eyes. "For a year," she said, her voice steady and clear, carrying easily across the silent hall, "I stood in this room and let you tell me I was worthless. I believed, for a while, that you might be right." She paused, looking slowly around at the faces that had once mocked her, now pale with uncertainty. "I am not here for revenge. I do not want fear, but I will no longer stand quietly while I am treated as less than I am." One by one, beginning with the nobles nearest her, the court began to kneel, not because the ancient wolves forced them to, but because they understood, finally, exactly who stood before them. Draven stepped down from his throne and walked to stand beside her. Then, in front of the entire court, the Alpha King knelt as well. "As king, I ask my people to honor you as you deserve," he said, "and as your mate, I ask for the chance to become someone worthy of standing beside you." The ancient wolves, their purpose fulfilled, began to fade back into soft silver mist, drifting toward the doors and out toward the forest from which they came, but their message had already taken root in every heart in that hall. Lyra reached down and gently touched Draven's shoulder, a small gesture, but one that carried the weight of forgiveness not yet given, but no longer impossible either. The court that had once whispered unworthy now spoke her name with something closer to reverence. And though healing would take time, though trust would need to be rebuilt slowly, Lyra Voss walked out of that hall not as the Omega everyone had mocked, but as the woman the ancient wolves themselves had chosen to kneel for. She had not needed to become someone else to be worthy of respect. She only needed the world to finally see who she had been all along.